So it's taken me a while to get back to it, but I think it's finally time to talk about the 10 worst abilities in Yu Yu Hakusho. I've had some time to mull this one over, and there's a surprising number of abilities or attacks that are just flat out garbage when compared to other characters' arsenals. And just like we did in the video discussing the top 10 abilities in Yu Yu Hakusho, which you can watch right here, we're going to be looking at this through the lens of how useful these abilities would be if they were in your hands. Before we begin, as always, a big thank you to the wonderful people who continue to support the channel via Patreon, with a special shout out to Brendan for joining the Celestial tier, and a welcome to our latest Stargazer, Mercury. If you'd like to support the channel, you can follow the link in the description or pinned comment below and join the community. If you can't, instead consider leaving a like and subscribe. Both of those interactions help way more than you think. Now let's dive right in with number 10, which you guys are not going to be happy about. Spirit Sword! Okay, just hear me out on this one because I know that this is a very hot take. And admittedly, my opinion on this is inseparable from how it was used in the show, so let me explain. The Spirit Sword on paper is a really neat ability to have at the ready. A weapon made of spirit energy that you can conjure up sounds cool, and it can make easy work of enemies that are weaker than or worse at fighting than you. However, what are you going to do against enemies that are stronger or better than you? And in this case, stronger can mean a wide variety of things. If an enemy is faster than you, even if they're less durable than you, how do you intend to hit them? If your enemy is slow but durable, it won't matter if your sword lacks the power to break through their defenses. And if your enemy is neither but is intellectually superior or has just more battle experience, how are you going to outsmart them enough to land a clean blow? And unlike most of the entries on this list, the Spirit Sword requires a constant stream of spirit energy to maintain it. So if you're not a prodigy or you're untrained, the way I assume most of us would be in this situation, you would likely exhaust your spirit energy long before you could end the fight. And that's even assuming you could end the fight with your own efforts. The genuine problem with the Spirit Sword is that if you lack the raw power or the blinding speed to truly make use of it, it's most likely not going to be enough to carry you through a fight against an enemy that's worth your attention. Fast enemies will just stay out of the way, durable enemies can just shrug it off, and a truly skilled enemy could parry it with their bare hands, which we've seen happen. Most of us are certainly not fast like Hiei, or powerful like Yusuke, or as intelligent as Kurama. Most of us are just as average as Kuwabara. And before you say it in the comments, which I'm sure some of you have already started doing, I'm not counting the Jigen as part of the Spirit Sword proper, because it was literally just a narrative MacGuffin for one arc in the story and was never used for any other purpose ever again. However, despite these flaws, a truly dedicated individual could find ways to make the Spirit Sword a viable part of their arsenal, and for that reason, it lands at number 10 and no higher.
And find yourself.
Number 9, we have Makuro's 3-dimensional cutter. This one falls on the list for no other reason than we just never get to see it live up to the hype or power associated with it. Again, on paper, this ability sounds incredibly cool. The ability to slice directly through the 3rd dimension? Sure, why not? In practice though, it seems a bit underwhelming. Now the reason that it falls so low on this list is because I do want to give it some semblance of the benefit of the doubt. The only time we see it in action is against Hiei and not against some rando. So I want to believe that the reason it didn't do more damage to Hiei is because Hiei was powerful enough in the story at this point to endure it. That being said though, I just can't understand how a being of any power level could come into direct contact with a tear in the literal fabric of reality and walk away mostly just inconvenienced. Like, I don't necessarily doubt its killing power, even though we didn't get to see that in action in the show, but there are just too many unknowns for this ability that's cool in concept, but in practice is just entirely underwhelming.
What?
Stretching into number 8, we have Hokushin's ability that I'm just going to refer to as bubble tape. If this was your ability and you walked up looking to squabble, most people would laugh you out of the room or be like, gross, don't bring that creepy ass neck of yours over here. Even your friends would stop inviting you to things before long. Not only is this ability pretty much only useful against enemies that are physically weaker than you, and even then, if their reaction and movement speed is slower than your attack speed, you can pretty much only use this ability to its fullest against an enemy one time. It wouldn't take your enemies long to realize that while you're noodling around like an idiot, you've left the rest of your body completely defenseless. At which point, they're going to stomp you out and then make fun of you again. I know it wasn't all that long ago that I was talking about Matari's genuine threat potential, which you can watch right here, but even if you had all of the abilities afforded to him by taking command of his territory, you would still spend most of your time basically useless. The biggest and most obvious drawback to his power is that it completely hinges on the presence of water in your direct vicinity. And since you would need to deposit your blood directly into the body of water itself, it doesn't matter if the water is just up the road if you can't get to it. Even if you carry around water to use in emergencies, at most you'll be able to create one of the smaller, more agile creatures. In order to draw out your full strength, you need to get exceedingly lucky and end up fighting in the rain, or somewhere with a large and accessible body of water nearby. God forbid you end up in an arid region or get caught slipping during a heat wave. It's another instance of once the enemies know what you're capable of, and under what circumstances to avoid you, you're suddenly on the back foot. The genuine power of this ability are completely overshadowed in every regard by just how limiting the restrictions are. We're slowly making our way to the abilities that have less defensible properties to them, and we're starting with Rando's Shrinking Curse. Honestly, for the most part, this ability isn't even all that bad. You say a chant, the enemy hears the chant, and then they shrink down to a size where they're at your mercy. We were never told if this was an ability that works on literally anyone or if there are limitations to that, but you could tell this was kind of created with the same energy as like a D&D rules lawyer. And by that I mean that there are plenty of spells in D&D that specify that you need to have line of sight on your target in order for the spell to work properly. And with that in mind, the Shrinking Curse seems busted until the story tells us that in order for it to work, the enemy needs to hear the chant. But okay, that doesn't sound so bad, right? Like even in D&D, if you don't have line of sight on a target with a spell that requires line of sight, you just can't use that spell. Nothing happens, right? But then we find out that if the opponent doesn't hear the chanting, then instead of nothing happening like we would all assume, instead the incantation essentially rebounds to the caster. We're also not told if the target has to be consciously listening or if they can be passively listening and still be affected. And if they have to be consciously listening, then Rando's Shrinking Curse could be rebounded by someone just kind of fucking ignoring you. And me taking the brunt of my own spell because my target wasn't fucking listening and causing me to shrink instead seems like a bit much in terms of penalties. Even if you knew that this was one of the drawbacks of this incantation, the risk is just too high. It's already tough enough to try to account for what someone else might be able to see, but when you have to account for what someone else may or may not be able to hear, and knowing that making the wrong call will lead to you Rick Moranising yourself, it's just not worth it. And like most of the things on this list, it only takes one screw up for this technique to become completely invalidated by anyone looking to take you out. If Rando's Shrinking Curse was the line in the sand separating us from the flawed but understandable techniques from everything else, then we're finally dipping our toes into the dregs. Starting with Makintaro's Axe Blade Fist. You pretty much get everything you need to know from the name. You turn one of your hands into a sharpened axe blade. I really don't know how much more bare bones you can get than simply turning one of your fists into a different weapon. Because a fist is already a weapon, so when you're just like, bling! Oh my god. Look at that, aren't I cool? Just like the Spirit Sword, this is a fine weapon for enemies that are fodder or just have terrible durability. Against literally any enemy that knows what they're doing or can just keep out of your range, you're basically just gonna get cooked. And assuming that Makintaro's regenerative abilities are completely separate from the Axe Blade Fist, if you lost your hands, you're just not a threat anymore. You would legitimately be better off getting a side hustle chopping firewood than going into combat. So right off the bat, I know exactly jack and shit about rugby, the sport. And all I know about the character is that he's dead. That aside, if you had the ability to create and then launch a ball that would pursue its target endlessly until hitting them, you would get crowned the God King of Dodgeball. In any other capacity, including combat, you would be wasting the time of literally everyone involved. You can summon the ball at will, and it does seem to have a bit of decent force behind it, as evidenced by it piercing through this relatively thick branch. But it's flimsy enough to be destroyed by a simple-ass battle axe? Like Makintaro could destroy this thing with a flick of the wrist? You fall victim to the same pitfalls as plenty of entries on this list, where an enemy that's fast and or durable is just going to run laps around you while you're busy playing with your balls. If your choices are nerf or nothing, you might legitimately be better off with nothing.
See how I'm stepping on your shadow? Here, it's as binding as a straitjacket. Now try to relax.
I really wanted to enjoy this ability more than I actually do. Like, I really wanted to like it, but unfortunately the disadvantages far outweigh any potential benefits. Like, sure, you can completely and utterly immobilize an enemy if you step on their shadow, but you still have to manage to step on their shadow. And unfortunately, this ability does fall into the one and done category because you will never be able to effectively use it more than once unless you leave no witnesses. But sure, let's say that you do get the drop on the enemy and you anchor them in place successfully. Congratulations, you've just limited your own mobility as well. You can still move around freely as long as you're within the bounds of their shadow, but this only gives you the upper hand if you only have one enemy to neutralize. You also can't stop the spread of information outside of a 1v1 setting. Sure, you might have them immobilized by stepping on their shadow, but they can continue yapping. If the enemy picks up on the fact that they stopped being able to move after you've stepped on their shadow, there's nothing to stop them from shouting that information to their allies. On top of that, this power also hinges on the idea that your enemy has no other way to attack you while they're immobilized. If the enemy has other options or is just versatile enough, they might not even need to be able to move their body in order to force you to retreat from their shadow or outright kill you based on how close you would have to be for the skill to work in the first place. But the added icing on the cake is that all it would take to render you completely powerless against an enemy is for them to just stay out of your reach. There were just too many avenues for enemies to be able to turn the tide on you, especially if you're in a situation where you're up against more than one enemy. And for that reason, this takes the number 3 spot.
Every time. Actually, it makes for a very nice attack.
Have you ever wanted to explode into tons of tiny little pieces and then fire those fragments of yourself at an enemy like little flesh knives? Well, now you can. On command, you can now separate and reconstitute yourself to bewilder, irritate, and just otherwise inconvenience your enemy. You can control each fragment of your shattered body independently to give yourself the edge, or just move yourself into a more advantageous position. However, it does expose your core to attack if your enemy has even 2 brain cells to rub together. For just 6 low and easy payments of $99.99, this ability could be yours, so call now. What's that? Downsides? Oh yeah, we should probably tell them those. So I've just been informed by our legal department that I must tell you the downsides to this product I am trying to sell you. The downside for you with this ability is that you are not made of stone, nor are your insides. So with the exception of launching your bones like spears, you'll probably do little more than make a mess. On top of that, Genbu is made of stone, so he very likely doesn't have a central nervous system the way you do. So boy oh boy is using this ability going to leave you in a debilitating and unyielding maw of hellish agony. And leaving all of your vital organs temporarily exposed is definitely the worst thing you can do to literally anything with a pulse. Removed from the context of the show, this ability is way worse for anything that is not a construct of some sort. For those of us that are piloting mechs made out of flesh, this is nothing more than a flashy way to forfeit a match. Wow, what an utterly shit ability. Compared to this technique, everything else on this list might as well be like Vegeta's final flash or something. If you pulled up to the squabble and this was the ace up your sleeve, you'd be better off using it to cover your escape while everyone is busy laughing at you. Literally all you can do with this ability is use your sweat to create a thick fog that blankets an area, lowering enemy visibility. And since you're using your sweat to do this, it does smell exactly the way you think it does. The show tells us just as much.
It smells like
Imagine the worst BO you've ever had, and then imagine that you're making that everyone else's problem within the range of an entire stadium. Nobody likes you. Aside from creating the fog being literally the only thing that happens, there are still somehow things that make this even worse. First off, it takes some time to get this ability set up and ready to go. Like, there are spells in Elden Ring that are far shorter than the casting time of this ability that are still considered to be too long to be used in combat. This ability leaves you a sitting duck in a way that's almost too stupid to believe. The only way I can see this ability being pulled off in a quicker or safer way is if you're not on the direct battlefield because you're trying to help in your own way, or if you've already worked up a sweat so that the casting time is shortened. But having those preconditions means that if you do end up on the battlefield and you're not already as sweaty as a League of Legends player, you're probably not bringing anything to the table. On top of that, you're obscuring the battlefield for everyone, friend and foe alike. However, I will give you a bit of the benefit of the doubt here and assume that because it's your spirit energy that the fog is made of, that's the way you're able to locate targets within it the way Bakken was able to despite low visibility. Bro, that sentence was rough. I am not, however, going to assume that this torrent of wind is a part of the technique and instead that it's its own distinct technique Bakken used to distract Yusuke so that he could get a sneak attack off. Even with the advantage of being able to track enemies in your wonderland of body odor, if you lack the means to end the fight yourself, or if your enemy has better senses than you thought and can locate you in the fog as well, then what was the point of this ability in the first place? And embarrassingly, this ability is only useful in an environment where there's no moving air. When a gentle breeze is more than enough to render your ability completely worthless, it's probably time to pack it up and just sit things out forever, my dude. And that wraps up the top 10 worst list. There were no honorable mentions this time because I just didn't feel like typing up 3 more entries. We call that lazy productivity in this house. Once again, a warm welcome to Mercury for joining the Stargazers, and as always, a huge shout out to our Celestial Tier members Brendan Carlson, This One Snack, and Trey Hardy. If you'd like to show some support for the channel, all of which gets funneled back into the channel, consider joining us on Patreon. Don't forget that until the end of the year, you can use discount code JUPITER to get 50% off your first month as a Celestial Tier member. And if you would be so kind, before you head out, please leave a like and subscribe. Both of those interactions go a long way with helping the algorithm notice small channels like mine. Remember to take care of yourselves and others, stay warm out there, I'll see you guys soon, and as always, thanks for watching.